The rain hits my shoulders like tiny hammers, each drop finding its way through the fabric of my jacket. I don't move, don't reach for cover, just stand here at the back of the ceremony, watching rows of soldiers in pressed uniforms hold their formation while water runs down their faces. No one invited me. No one knows I'm here. The parking lot stretches between me and the covered pavilion where my family sits in the front row. My mother wears her navy dress, the one she saves for important occasions. My father adjusts his tie every few minutes the way he does when he's nervous. And there in the center of it all stands my sister Emily in her dress blues, chin high, eyes forward. 27 soldiers lined up in perfect rows, each one about to receive their unit colors before deployment. The ceremony that marks the beginning of something bigger than themselves. I've been to this ceremony before, just never as a spectator. The sergeant major walks the line slowly, his boots clicking against the wet pavement. He carries the unit streamers, strips of fabric that hold the weight of tradition, each one bearing the motto and emblem of the units these soldiers will join overseas. When he reaches each soldier, he pauses, says something quiet, pins the streamer to their uniform. This is the moment that matters. The moment when you stop being just a person in a uniform and become part of something that existed before you and will exist long after you're gone. The sergeant major reaches Emily. She straightens even more if that's possible. He pins her streamer, leans close to say something that makes her smile. My mother's hand finds my father's arm. They're both beaming. First in the Barrett family to serve, according to the program, someone left on the ground near my feet. The sergeant major continues down the line. 3 more soldiers, 2 more, 1. Then he turns, starts walking back toward the pavilion. His eyes sweep the area, taking in the crowd of families, the scattered umbrellas. He stops. His gaze locks on mine across the parking lot. For a moment, neither of us moves. Then he changes direction, walking straight toward me through the rain. "Wait," he says, when he's close enough that I can see the recognition in his eyes. "You're Barrett." I don't answer, can't answer. My throat has forgotten how to work. "Weren't you with 21st TSC in Kaiserslautern?" His voice drops lower. "I remember you. Supply unit forklift injury, right? They wrote you up real strong before you separated." Behind him, I see Emily turn. Her face goes white as she stares across the distance between us. My mother sees me next. Her mouth opens, then closes. Her hands start to shake. The rain keeps falling. I keep standing. And for the first time in 7 years, someone remembers my name. My name is Jessica Lynn Barrett. I'm the oldest daughter, the first to enlist, the first to disappear. If you asked my family if you cornered them at a barbecue or caught them after church, they'd tell you I'm the quitter, the army dropout, the embarrassment who couldn't hack it through basic training and came crawling home with her tail between her legs. They've been telling that story for 7 years now, long enough that even they believe it. But I need you to know the truth, because truth has a way of surfacing when you least expect it. Like standing in the rain at your sister's deployment ceremony, watching a sergeant major remember your name when your own mother pretends she's forgotten it. I enlisted at 20, March 15, 2018. The recruiter's office smelled like burnt coffee and old paperwork, and when I signed my name on that contract, my hand shook so hard I had to grip the pen with both fists. Not from fear, from excitement, from the weight of finally doing something that mattered. Fort Jackson for basic training. 10 weeks of heat and exhaustion and the kind of pride that builds itself one push-up at a time. The day I graduated, I called home 3 times. No one answered. The ceremony program listed family members under each soldier's name. Mine was blank, but I had made it. I was a soldier. They stationed me in Kaiserslautern, Germany. 21st TSC Theater Sustainment Command. Not the kind of assignment that makes headlines or inspires movies. We handled supply and distribution for the entire European theater. Moved equipment, tracked inventory, made sure the right materials got to the right places at the right times. It wasn't glamorous. 12-hour shifts in warehouses that echoed with the sound of forklifts and cargo trucks. Paperwork that seemed to multiply every time you looked away. But it was real work, important work. The kind that keeps an entire operation running even if no one notices until something goes wrong. For 14 months I did that job, got promoted to specialist, earned my supervisor's respect, learned to drive every piece of equipment in our motor pool, and could rebuild a forklift engine with my eyes closed. Then came the accident. February 23, 2019. I was moving a pallet of medical supplies to the loading dock when the forklift's rear wheel hit a patch of ice. The whole machine tilted, and I had maybe 2 seconds to decide whether to jump clear or try to keep it upright. I chose to stay with it, try to save the load. The forklift didn't flip, but my knee took the full impact when it slammed into the dock wall. Tore my meniscus clean through, the kind of injury that sounds minor until you try to walk, and then you realize your leg has forgotten how to hold your weight. Surgery, physical therapy, months of paperwork while the VA doctors debated whether I'd ever be fit for full duty again. The final verdict came on a Tuesday: medical separation. Honorable discharge. Thank you for your service. I was 21 years old and my military career was over. I didn't ask for medals, didn't expect parades or newspaper articles. I just wanted to come home and figure out what came next. Maybe get some help with the knee that still aches when it rains. But I didn't expect to be erased. I didn't expect to walk into my childhood home and find my room repainted, my uniforms gone, my military ID, and discharge papers tucked away like evidence of a crime. I didn't expect my mother to introduce me to neighbors as my daughter who's been traveling, or my father to change the subject every time someone asked about my service. I didn't expect to become the family secret. The story they tell now is simple and clean. Jessica couldn't cut it. Jessica quit during basic training. Jessica was never really soldier material anyway. Emily, sweet, social, successful. Emily, she's the one with the warrior spirit. She's the one who'll make us proud. They've said it so many times that I started to wonder if maybe they were right. Maybe I was just fooling myself thinking those 14 months meant something. Maybe getting hurt was just proof that I wasn't strong enough for this life. But standing in that parking lot, watching the sergeant major's face light up with recognition, hearing him say my unit's name like it was something worth remembering, that's when I knew the truth had been waiting for me all along. I was never the failure in this story. I was the first. And some truths are too heavy to stay buried forever. Fort Jackson in March feels like stepping into someone else's fever dream. The Georgia heat wraps around you like a wet blanket. And by week 3, you stop noticing the sweat that pools in your boots, or the way your uniform clings to your back during morning PT. I remember the first time I hit all my targets at the rifle range. The sharp crack of the M16, the smell of gunpowder, the way Drill Sergeant Martinez nodded once, just once, when she saw my scorecard. That nod meant more than any trophy I'd ever won in high school. The other recruits talked about their families visiting for family day, parents driving down from Atlanta or flying in from wherever home was. They'd show off their newly pressed uniforms, demonstrate the proper way to make a rack, explain the difference between a drill sergeant and a drill instructor. I called home the night before family day. My mother answered on the 4th ring. "We can't make it, honey," she said, and I could hear the TV in the background. "Your father's got that conference in Charlotte, and Emily has her debate tournament." "It's just one day," I said. "The ceremony starts at 10. Maybe next time." There was no next time. Graduation was 2 weeks later, and I stood in formation watching other soldiers pose for pictures with their families, hug their parents, show off their new rank. I had my phone, but no one to call. But I had made it. 10 weeks of hell, and I was still standing. Germany was different. Kaiserslautern sits in the middle of wine country, all rolling hills and medieval villages that look like postcards. The base itself sprawled across several square miles, a piece of America dropped into the German countryside. The 21st TSC operated out of a series of warehouses that stretched along the main supply road. No windows, concrete floors, the kind of fluorescent lighting that makes everything look slightly green. My job was inventory control, tracking every piece of equipment, every supply shipment, every requisition form that crossed my desk. It sounds boring until you realize that somewhere downrange a unit is waiting for the body armor you're processing, or the medical supplies you're shipping, or the communications equipment that might save lives. Every spreadsheet, every pallet, every late-night inventory count mattered to someone you'd never meet. I worked alongside soldiers from every branch, contractors who'd been doing this job longer than I'd been alive, and German nationals who knew the local systems better than any of us. We'd start at 600 and finish when the work was done, sometimes 16 hours later. Sergeant Williams, my supervisor, was a career logistics soldier who could look at a shipping manifest and tell you exactly what was wrong with it just by the weight distribution. He taught me to read the paperwork like a story, every line item connected to the one before it, every delivery schedule dependent on factors most people never considered. Barrett, he'd say, logistics is like plumbing. Nobody thinks about it until it stops working. Then everybody screams. The forklift accident happened on a Tuesday morning in February. I'd been moving medical supplies to the loading dock standard shipment, nothing unusual. The rear wheel hit a patch of ice that maintenance had missed, and the whole machine tilted sideways. 2 seconds. That's all the time you have when 3 tons of equipment start to fall. I could have jumped clear, saved myself, let the forklift and its cargo crash into the dock wall. But those boxes contained trauma kits, bound for a forward operating base. Someone's life might depend on them arriving intact. I stayed with the machine, threw my weight against the steering wheel, tried to keep it upright. The forklift didn't flip, but my knee took the full impact when it slammed into the concrete barrier. The pain was immediate and total, like someone had driven a railroad spike through my kneecap. The medics arrived within minutes. Sergeant Williams held my hand. While they loaded me onto the stretcher, told me I'd done good, that the supplies were intact. The last thing I remember before the morphine kicked in was the sound of the forklift's engine still running, like it was waiting for me to come back and finish the job. Surgery at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center. The surgeon, a colonel who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, explained that my meniscus was torn beyond repair. They could clean it up, remove the damaged tissue, but my knee would never be the same. Full recovery might take months, and even then I'd be limited in what I could do. We'll keep you on profile while you heal, he said. See how you respond to physical therapy. Physical therapy meant 3 months of exercises that felt like torture, working with therapists who pushed me harder than any drill sergeant ever had. I got stronger, but not strong enough. The knee still locked up during long marches, still swelled after extended periods on my feet. The VA doctors were practical about it. Medical separation, they said. Honorable discharge. You've served your country now. Let us help you transition to civilian life. I could have fought it. Could have demanded a second opinion, pushed for a different medical review board. But I was tired. Tired of the pain, tired of the uncertainty, tired of feeling like I was holding my unit back. So I accepted the discharge, packed my belongings into 2 duffel bags, said goodbye to soldiers I'd worked beside for over a year, and flew home to Pennsylvania with a brace on my knee and a folder full of paperwork that proved I'd been a soldier once. My parents picked me up at the airport. The ride home was quiet, my father asking safe questions about the flight, my mother staring out the window. When we pulled into the driveway, I saw Emily's car parked in my usual spot. How long was I gone? I asked. 14 months, my mother said. Feels longer. That night at dinner, Emily asked about Germany, about the base, about what it was like being a soldier. I started to tell her about the work, about the responsibility, about the way it felt to be part of something bigger than yourself. My father interrupted. So what happened? Why are you back so soon? I explained about the accident, about the medical board, about the honorable discharge. I showed them the paperwork, the commendation letters, the photographs of me in uniform. My mother looked at the brace on my knee, at the stack of VA forms on the table. How could you give up so quickly? She asked. They didn't ask what it was like to serve. They asked how I could have quit. And that's when I realized they'd already decided what story they wanted to tell. The changes started small, so small I almost missed them. My bedroom walls, which had been the same shade of mint green since middle school, were suddenly beige. We thought you might want something more mature, my mother said when I asked, but her eyes didn't meet mine. The Air Force recruitment poster I'd hung next to my desk, the one that had inspired me to enlist in the first place, was gone, replaced by a generic landscape painting from Target. My high school graduation photo still sat on the hallway table, but the smaller frame next to it, the one that held my basic training graduation picture, had vanished. When I asked about it, my mother claimed she didn't remember seeing it there. Maybe you took it with you to Germany, she suggested, but we both knew I hadn't. The first time I heard the new story, I was in the kitchen making coffee. My mother was on the phone with her sister Aunt Carol, who lived in Florida, and called every Sunday to catch up on family gossip. Jessica's back home, my mother said, her voice carefully neutral. She tried the military thing, but it didn't work out. You know how boot camp is, not everyone can handle it. I stood there holding my coffee mug, waiting for her to correct herself, to mention Germany or the injury or the honorable discharge paperwork sitting in my desk drawer. Instead, she changed the subject to Emily's college applications. The second time, I was standing in line at the grocery store behind Mrs. Henderson, who'd been our neighbor since I was in elementary school. She recognized me and asked how I was doing. Mentioned she had heard I'd joined the army. "Oh, that didn't last long," my mother said, appearing beside me with a cart full of groceries. "Jessica decided it wasn't for her. You know how young people are these days, always changing their minds." Mrs. Henderson nodded sympathetically. "Well, it's good she figured it out early." I wanted to speak up to tell her about Kaiserslautern, about the forklift accident, about the commendation letter Sergeant Williams had written. But my mother was already steering the conversation elsewhere, asking about Mrs. Henderson's grandchildren, and the moment passed. By the third time, I understood what was happening. This wasn't confusion or embarrassment. This was deliberate. The story my mother told was clean and simple. Jessica couldn't handle military life. Jessica quit during basic training. Jessica was never really soldier material anyway. And slowly, systematically, she began erasing the evidence that contradicted it. My deployment bag disappeared from the closet. My military ID, which I'd left on my dresser, vanished overnight. When I asked about it, my mother claimed she was tidying up and must have put it somewhere safe, but she could never remember where. The worst part was watching Emily absorb it all. She was 14 then, old enough to remember me leaving for basic training, old enough to recall the phone calls from Germany. But she was also young enough to trust that adults knew what they were talking about. I came home one afternoon to find her in my room, sitting on my bed with a confused expression. "Why do you have combat boots?" she asked, pointing to the pair I'd worn during my final weeks at Fort Jackson. Before I could answer, my mother appeared in the doorway. "Those are from Goodwill," she said smoothly. "Jessica bought them because she thought they looked cool." "Don't ask, sweetie." Emily nodded and left the room. My mother lingered for a moment, looking at the boots, then at me. "They're taking up space," she said finally. "Maybe it's time to donate them back." That night, I moved the boots to my car. By morning, they were gone from there too. The family narrative solidified over the following months. Jessica had tried to be a soldier, but couldn't hack it. Emily, on the other hand, was showing real leadership potential. Emily was the one with the warrior spirit. Emily would be the first real soldier in the Barrett family. At Emily's high school graduation, my mother introduced me to her friends as my daughter who's been figuring herself out. When someone asked about my plans, she'd quickly redirect the conversation to Emily's acceptance into the state university's ROTC program. "She's always been the strong one," my mother would say, beaming with pride. Ever since she was little, we knew she was destined for something special. I started to wonder if I'd imagined it all. The deployment, the injury, the honorable discharge. Maybe it had all been some elaborate fantasy. Maybe I really had quit during basic training, and everything else was just wishful thinking. But then I'd feel the ache in my knee when it rained, or I'd catch sight of a scar on my hand from a piece of equipment in the Kaiserslautern warehouse, and I'd remember. I'd been there, I'd served, I'd been a soldier, just not in this house. The final piece of evidence disappeared on a Tuesday morning in October. I was looking for my birth certificate to get a new driver's license, searching through the filing cabinet in my father's office. That's when I found the folder marked Jessica Military. Inside were my discharge papers, my medical records, my commendation letters, and a photograph I'd forgotten existed me in my dress uniform, standing next to the unit flag at our farewell ceremony in Germany. Someone had written on the back, Specialist Jessica Barrett, 21st TSC, February 2019. I stared at the photo for a long time. This was proof. This was me in uniform doing the job I'd been trained to do. When I looked up, my mother was standing in the doorway. "I was wondering when you'd find that," she said quietly. "Why did you hide it?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked over and gently took the photo from my hands. "Sometimes," she said, "the stories we tell ourselves are more important than the ones that actually happened." She left the room, taking the photograph with her. I never saw it again. That's when I realized my mother wasn't just ashamed of my military service. She was actively rewriting our family history, erasing me from it one piece at a time. And I was letting her do it. Emily thrived in ROTC the way some people thrive in water, naturally, effortlessly, like she'd been born for it. She came home from her first semester with stories about leadership labs and physical training, her eyes bright with the kind of enthusiasm I remembered feeling once. "We did this exercise where you have to get your whole squad across a pretend river using only rope and wooden planks," she told us over dinner, gesturing with her fork. I figured out that if we made a pulley system, we could get everyone across in half the time. My father leaned forward, interested. That's real problem solving. That's leadership. The instructor said I have natural command presence, Emily continued. He thinks I should consider going active duty after graduation. My mother practically glowed. The first Barrett to serve her country. I was sitting right there, right across the table from them, cutting my chicken into small pieces because chewing gave me something to do with my mouth besides scream. But Emily didn't correct her. Emily just smiled and said, I hope I can make you proud. Within a year, Emily had become the star of her ROTC program. She made the color guard, earned a leadership position, got selected for summer training at Fort Knox. Every achievement came with a family celebration dinner at the nice restaurant downtown, photos posted on social media, calls to relatives who hadn't heard from us in months. I watched it all from the sidelines like a spectator at someone else's life. The university's ROTC program had a website where they featured outstanding cadets. Emily's profile went live during her sophomore year, complete with a professional headshot and a biography that made my stomach turn. Cadet Emily Barrett is a rising star in the program, known for her exceptional leadership abilities and unwavering dedication to service. As the first in her family to pursue a military career, she brings a unique perspective to her role as squad leader. I've always dreamed of serving my country, Barrett says. Being part of something bigger than myself has been my goal since childhood. The first in her family to pursue a military career. I read that line 17 times before I closed the laptop. Later that week, I drove past the university campus and saw Emily on the quad, leading a group of younger cadets through some kind of drill. She moved with confidence, her voice carrying across the open space as she called out commands. She looked good in the uniform, natural. For a moment, I felt proud of her. Then I remembered that she was wearing the title that used to be mine. The family photo wall in our hallway told the story my mother wanted to preserve. Emily in her dress blues at the military ball. Emily receiving her first leadership award. Emily shaking hands with a visiting general who'd come to speak at the university. Every frame filled with moments that mattered, achievements worth celebrating, a daughter worth bragging about. The space where my basic training graduation photo used to hang was now occupied by Emily's high school senior portrait. The spot where I'd once displayed my deployment certificate held Emily's ROTC scholarship announcement. I wasn't just replaced. I was wiped. At family gatherings, relatives would ask Emily about her plans, about her training, about what it felt like to be breaking new ground for the Barrett family. She'd answer with the kind of polite enthusiasm that made everyone nod approvingly. It's such an honor, she'd say. I know I'm setting an example for future generations of our family. And I'd sit there picking at my food, wondering if I should mention that I'd already set that example. That I'd already walked through that door, already sworn that oath, already learned what it meant to serve. But what was the point? The story had already been written, and I wasn't in it. The worst part was watching Emily believe it. Not just the public version, the carefully crafted biography for the ROTC website, but the private one too. The family mythology that positioned her as the trailblazer, the first Barrett to answer the call of duty. One evening, she came home from a leadership seminar, excited about a presentation she'd heard. The speaker talked about how military families pass down their values through generations, she told us. How service becomes part of your DNA. I kept thinking about Grandpa Joe and how he would have been so proud to see our family finally stepping up. Grandpa Joe had been a World War II veteran who died when Emily was 8. He'd been the one who'd first planted the seed of military service in my mind, telling stories about his unit in the Pacific, showing me his medals, teaching me to fold the flag properly. He would have loved to see you in uniform, my mother said, and I realized she was talking to Emily, not me. But Grandpa Joe had seen me in uniform. I'd sent him photos from basic training, called him from Germany, to tell him about my assignment. He'd been proud of me, told me I was carrying on the family tradition. Now that tradition had been retroactively transferred to Emily, as if my service had never happened. The social media posts were the final insult. My mother's Facebook page became a shrine to Emily's military career. Every promotion, every award, every milestone documented and celebrated for all her friends to see. So proud of my daughter Emily. Read the caption under a photo of her at commissioning ceremony. The first Barrett to serve her country. She's everything I hoped she would be. 137 likes. Dozens of comments congratulating my mother on raising such an exceptional daughter. I wasn't tagged in the post. I wasn't mentioned in the comments. I might as well have never existed. And maybe in this version of our family story, I never had. I moved to rural Pennsylvania in September, to a town where nobody knew the Barrett family name or cared about anyone's military history. 3 hours north of my parents' house, far enough that surprise visits weren't likely close enough that I couldn't claim I'd disappeared entirely. The apartment was a second-floor walk-up, above a hardware store on Main Street. 1 bedroom, a kitchen the size of a closet, and windows that faced the mountains instead of parking lots. The rent was cheap because nothing ever happened here, and nothing happening was exactly what I needed. I found work at a distribution center 20 minutes outside town. The job was simple: scan barcodes, move boxes, load trucks. 8 hours a day of work that required my hands, but not my history. The other employees were a mix of college dropouts and people between careers, all of us content to collect our paychecks without asking too many personal questions. My supervisor, Mark, was a veteran himself, Vietnam era, with the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd seen things he didn't talk about. During my first week, he noticed me favoring my left leg during the longer shifts. "Old injury?" he asked. "Something like that." He nodded and moved me to a station that required less walking. We never discussed it again. The VA appointments became my only connection to my military past. Once a month, I'd drive to the medical center in Wilkes-Barre for physical therapy and to pick up prescriptions for the pain in my knee. The waiting room was full of veterans from every conflict since Korea, all of us sitting quietly with our claim numbers and disability ratings. The counselors there spoke a language I understood. They knew what a medical separation meant, knew the difference between being wounded and being broken, knew that some stories were too complicated for civilian small talk. When they asked about my service, I could answer honestly, without having to explain or defend or justify. 14 months in Germany, I'd say, and they'd nod, like that was enough. Because it was. At home, I kept exactly 1 reminder of my time in the Army, my old name tape. The one with Barrett embroidered in black letters on a green background. I'd found it in the bottom of my deployment bag, somehow overlooked when my mother was sanitizing my room of military evidence. I kept it in a small canvas pouch that I carried in my jacket pocket. Not because I planned to show it to anyone, but because touching it reminded me that those 14 months had actually happened. That Specialist Barrett had existed even if she was inconvenient for everyone else to remember. The first Veterans Day in my new town, I stayed home. Watched the parade on television, listened to the speeches about service and sacrifice, saw the interview with a local family whose son was deploying to Afghanistan. His mother talked about how proud she was, how scared she was, how the whole community was supporting them. I thought about calling my parents, maybe driving down to participate in their town ceremony. Then I remembered the family photo wall, the missing pictures, the careful way my mother avoided certain topics. It was easier to stay invisible. My coworkers gradually learned that I was the quiet one, the one who did her job well, but didn't join them for drinks after work. When they talked about their families, their plans, their complicated relationships, I listened without contributing much to the conversation. Sometimes people would guess at my background. Sarah from receiving thought I might have been a teacher based on the way I organized my workspace. Tom from shipping was convinced I'd worked in an office somewhere, maybe accounting or data entry. Nobody guessed military. When the topic came up, usually around holidays, or when someone mentioned a relative in the service, I let them assume what they wanted. It was easier than explaining that I'd been a soldier once briefly in a war that didn't exist, and a unit nobody had heard of for reasons too complicated to summarize in a lunch break conversation. It was easier to play dead than argue I existed. That became my strategy. Not lying exactly, just letting people fill in the blanks with whatever story made them comfortable. The woman who'd lived quietly, worked ordinary jobs, never done anything particularly noteworthy or worth discussing. It was a different kind of erasure than what my family had done. This one was voluntary, self-imposed, a choice I made every day to remain invisible, rather than fight for recognition that might never come. The months turned into years. I got promoted to shift supervisor, moved to a better apartment, bought a used Honda that didn't break down every winter. I built a small, stable life that required nothing from my past and promised nothing to my future. I told myself I was content. I told myself that some battles weren't worth fighting, that some truths were too heavy to carry around. But every Veterans Day, I'd take out that name tape and hold it in my palm, feeling the weight of those black letters spelling out a name that used to mean something. Barrett. And I'd remember, just for a moment, what it felt like to be seen. The message came on a Tuesday morning in March, 7 years after I'd moved to Pennsylvania. I was drinking coffee in my kitchen, scrolling through my phone before work, when the notification popped up from Facebook Messenger. Vanessa Mitchell. I hadn't heard from her since leaving Germany. She'd been in my unit at the 21st TSC, a motor transport operator from Tennessee, who could fix any vehicle in our fleet and had opinions about everything from Army coffee to foreign policy. We'd worked different shifts but had become friends during the long hours, sharing stories about our families and plans for after the service. The message was short. Hey, saw this on the Fort Carson Spouses and Veterans group. That's your sister. Attached was a flyer. The kind of polished announcement that military public affairs offices produce for community events. The header read deployment ceremony in bold letters with the date, time, and location listed below, but it was the name in the middle that made my coffee cup freeze halfway to my lips. 2LT Emily Barrett, first in her family to serve. Below Emily's name was a professional photograph of her in dress blues, looking confident and proud. The ceremony was scheduled for this weekend at Fort Carson, Colorado. Emily was deploying to Africa with a logistics unit. I stared at the screen for a long time, reading those words again and again. First in her family to serve. My phone buzzed with another message from Vanessa. Thought that was weird. I definitely remember you talking about your little sister. This is her, right? I typed and deleted several responses. Yes, that's her. No, she's not the first. It's complicated. The family doesn't talk about my service anymore. Finally, I just wrote, yeah, that's Emily. Cool. Tell her good luck from the 21st TSC crew. We gotta stick together. I didn't respond. Instead, I sat there holding my phone, looking at Emily's photograph, reading that title over and over until the words lost their meaning. First in her family to serve. I thought about Vanessa scrolling through her social media feeds, seeing that announcement and recognizing the Barrett name. I wondered how many other people from my unit had seen it. How many remembered me talking about my family, about my younger sister who was thinking about ROTC. I wondered if any of them were confused by the first in her family designation, or if they'd just assumed they'd misremembered my stories. The ceremony was in 3 days. Colorado was a long drive from Pennsylvania, but not impossible. I could take a long weekend drive out there, see Emily off to her deployment. But why would I do that? I hadn't been invited. My family had made it clear that my presence at military events was neither expected nor desired. Emily probably didn't even know I was aware of her deployment. I put the phone down and finished my coffee, tried to focus on getting ready for work. But the flyer kept pulling my attention back. The formal military language, the proud family photograph, the careful way Emily's biography positioned her as a pioneer. At work, I moved through my usual routine, checking inventory, processing shipments, supervising the afternoon crew. But my mind kept drifting to that ceremony, to Emily standing in formation while our parents watched from the audience, beaming with pride at their daughter, who was finally giving them the military story they wanted. During my break, I pulled out the canvas pouch from my jacket pocket and unfolded my old name tape. The black letters were slightly faded now, but still clear, Barrett. I thought about Sergeant Williams, my old supervisor, and the way he talked about logistics being like plumbing invisible until something went wrong. I thought about the forklift accident, about the medical board, about the honorable discharge that had ended my career before I'd really understood what I was losing. I thought about Emily preparing for her own deployment, probably nervous and excited and proud to be carrying the family name into service. The same name that was embroidered on the tape in my hands. That evening, I called in sick for Friday and started planning the drive to Colorado. I wasn't going to disrupt Emily's ceremony or cause a scene with my parents. I wasn't going to demand recognition or force a confrontation. I didn't want to be seen. I just wanted to see. I folded the name tape back into my jacket pocket, where it had lived for 7 years, waiting for a moment like this. Barrett. Some truths are too heavy to stay buried forever. The drive to Colorado took 14 hours. I stopped twice for gas, and once at a truck stop in Kansas, where I sat in my car for 20 minutes, questioning whether I was making a mistake. But I kept driving, following the GPS through Denver and south toward Fort Carson, arriving just as the sun was setting behind the mountains. I found a motel near the base and slept poorly, waking every hour to check the time. The ceremony was scheduled for 1400 hours, 2 in the afternoon. I had the entire morning to change my mind, but I didn't change my mind. I showered, put on the nicest clothes I owned, black slacks and a gray sweater that didn't scream, "I used to be one of you," and drove onto the base. The guard at the gate checked my ID, asked about the purpose of my visit. "Deployment ceremony," I said. "Family member." I hesitated for just a moment. "Yes." The ceremony was being held at the parade field, a large open area surrounded by administrative buildings and barracks. I arrived 30 minutes early and parked in the back of the visitor lot, watching other families stream toward the covered pavilion where rows of folding chairs had been set up. Then I saw them. My parents walking across the parking lot in their dress clothes. My father in his navy suit. My mother in the same outfit she'd worn to Emily's college graduation. They looked older than I remembered, more formal, like they were attending a state dinner, rather than their daughter's deployment ceremony. Emily walked beside them in her dress blues, the uniform crisp and perfectly fitted. She moved with confidence, her bearing straight and professional. She looked good. She looked like a soldier. I stayed in my car until the ceremony began, then walked to the back of the crowd. No umbrella, no program, no assigned seat. Just me and the gathering storm clouds overhead. The rain started as the commanding officer took the podium, light at first, then steadier, drumming against the pavilion roof and soaking the families who hadn't thought to bring umbrellas. I didn't move. The water ran down my face into my jacket, but I stayed where I was watching. 27 soldiers lined up in perfect formation on the field. Emily was in the second row, 4th from the left. Her posture was flawless, her expression focused. She didn't look toward the crowd, didn't search for familiar faces. Her attention was entirely on the ceremony, on the moment she was about to enter. The commanding officer spoke about deployment, about service, about the weight of representing your country in foreign lands. Then the chaplain offered a prayer asking for protection and wisdom for the soldiers about to leave home. Finally, the moment I'd come to see, the presentation of unit streamers. This was the tradition that mattered most, each soldier receiving a small piece of fabric that bore their unit's motto and emblem, a tangible connection to the history and mission they were about to join. These streamers would travel with them overseas, reminders of who they served with and what they represented. The sergeant major stepped forward, carrying a wooden box containing the streamers. He was an older man, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of decades in the service, multiple deployments, countless ceremonies just like this one. He started at the left end of the front row, moving slowly down the line. At each soldier he paused, said something quiet, pinned the streamer to their uniform. A moment of personal recognition before they became part of something larger. I watched him work his way through the formation. Front row complete, second row beginning. 3 soldiers down from Emily now. 2, 1. He reached Emily and stopped just as he had with all the others. But instead of immediately pinning her streamer, he leaned closer, said something that made her nod seriously. Then he stepped back, saluted briefly, and moved on to the next soldier. 7 more soldiers to go. 5, 3. Then the sergeant major completed the last presentation and turned to walk back toward the pavilion. His route took him past the edge of the crowd, past the families standing in their dress clothes under umbrellas, past me. His eyes swept the audience, taking in the proud parents and nervous spouses, the children who didn't understand what was happening, but knew it was important. Then his gaze locked on mine. He stopped walking, stared at me for a moment, his expression shifting from professional courtesy to recognition. He changed direction. "Wait," he said, approaching me through the rain. His voice was quiet but carried the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "You're Barrett." It wasn't a question. "From 21st TSC in Kaiserslautern, right?" He moved closer, studying my face. "I remember you, supply unit forklift injury. They wrote you up real strong before you separated." I didn't speak, couldn't speak. My throat had forgotten how to work. Behind him I saw Emily's head turn. She was still in formation, still at attention, but her eyes found mine across the distance. For a moment neither of us moved. She saw me standing there in the rain, saw the way the sergeant major was talking to me, saw the recognition in his expression. She knew. I watched the realization move across her face like a wave. The confusion first, then the understanding, then something that might have been relief or might have been guilt. Our mother noticed Emily's distraction and followed her gaze. When she saw me standing there, when she saw the sergeant major speaking to me like I was someone worth knowing, her face went white. Her jaw clenched. Her hands started to shake. She knew, too. The sergeant major was still talking, mentioning something about my medical records, about the commendation letter my supervisor had written, about how he'd been sorry to hear about my early separation. But his words felt distant, like they were coming from underwater. All I could focus on was Emily's face, on the way she was looking at me. Not with anger or resentment, but with something that looked like recognition. Like she was seeing me clearly for the first time in 7 years. Our mother took a step forward, then stopped. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then closed it again. The rain kept falling, but she didn't seem to notice. No one screamed. No one made a scene. But the lie cracked loud enough to echo across the parade field. Loud enough that everyone who mattered could hear it breaking. The sergeant major finished whatever he'd been saying and moved on, returning to his duties. The ceremony continued around us, closing remarks, dismissed formation families rushing forward to embrace their deploying soldiers. But I stayed where I was, watching Emily walk toward our parents, watching our mother try to compose herself, watching my father look confused and concerned. Emily reached them and said something I couldn't hear. Our mother shook her head, gestured in my direction, started to explain or justify or deflect. Emily listened for a moment, then left them standing there. She walked across the field through the dispersing crowd straight toward me. I waited for her to arrive, feeling the rain on my shoulders, feeling the weight of 7 years of silence finally breaking open. I left before Emily reached me, not out of anger or fear, but because I'd gotten what I came for. The moment when the truth surfaced, when someone who mattered remembered my name, when the careful fiction my family had constructed finally cracked under the weight of reality. I walked back to my car through the rain, started the engine, and drove off the base without looking back. In my rearview mirror, I could see Emily standing where I'd been scanning the parking lot, searching for someone who was already gone. The drive back to Pennsylvania took longer than the drive out. I stopped more frequently, took detours through small towns I'd never seen before, pulled over at rest stops to stretch my legs and process what had happened. There was no urgency now, no deadline to meet. Just 14 hours of highway and time to think. My phone buzzed with notifications throughout the drive, but I didn't check them until I was home, sitting in my apartment with a cup of coffee and the familiar silence of my carefully constructed life. 7 missed calls from my mother, 3 voicemails I deleted without listening to, a string of text messages that started apologetic and gradually shifted toward defensive. But it was Emily's message that stopped me cold. "Jess, I didn't know. Please talk to me." I stared at those words for a long time, simple, direct, without the careful deflection that had characterized every family conversation for the past 7 years. No justification, no explanation, just an acknowledgement that something important had been hidden from her. Another message followed an hour later. "I've been thinking about things that never made sense, about why you were gone for so long, about the boots Mom said were from Goodwill, about why you always changed the subject when I asked about your traveling. I think I understand now." Then another, "I'm deploying tomorrow. I'll be gone for 9 months, but when I get back I want to know the real story, not Mom's version, yours." I held the phone in my hands, feeling its weight, considering what to type back. An explanation maybe, or an acceptance of her offer to talk, or just a simple acknowledgement that I'd received her messages and was grateful for them. Instead, I set the phone aside without responding. This wasn't about anger or punishment. I wasn't trying to hurt Emily or teach her a lesson. But 7 years of silence had taught me that some conversations require more than good intentions. They require space and time and the kind of readiness that can't be rushed. I pulled the canvas pouch from my jacket pocket and unfolded my old name tape, spreading it flat on the kitchen table. The black letters were slightly faded now, worn from years of being folded and unfolded, carried from place to place like a secret. Barrett. For 7 years I'd carried this single piece of evidence that I'd been a soldier once, not because I thought I'd need to prove it to anyone, but because touching it reminded me that those 14 months had actually happened. That specialist Barrett had existed even when everyone else seemed determined to forget her. I wasn't mad at Emily. She'd been 14 when I left for Germany, 16, when I came back injured and silent. She'd absorbed the story our mother told, because it was the only story she'd been given. How could she have known that crucial details were being omitted, that the narrative was being edited to remove inconvenient truths? Emily had built her own military career on the foundation of being the first, and now she was discovering that the foundation was false. That had to be confusing, maybe even devastating. Learning that you've been living someone else's revised version of reality is never easy. But I wasn't mad at Emily. I was mad at myself for letting it happen, for accepting the erasure, for moving away instead of standing my ground, for choosing invisibility over the messy work of insisting on truth. I was mad that I'd let myself disappear so completely that my own sister didn't know I'd served, that I'd allowed my mother's version of events to become the official family history, unchallenged and unquestioned. I was mad that it had taken a chance encounter with the sergeant major at Emily's deployment ceremony to crack open the lie I'd been living with for 7 years. My phone buzzed with another message from Emily, but I didn't look at it. Tomorrow she'd be on a plane to Africa, beginning her own deployment, starting her own story of service. When she came back in 9 months, maybe we'd talk. Maybe we'd figure out how to rebuild a relationship that had been constructed on incomplete information. But tonight I just sat with my name tape and the silence I'd chosen, finally understanding the difference between disappearing and being erased. One was a choice, the other was a theft, and I was done being robbed. The package arrived on a Thursday morning 2 weeks after Emily's deployment. I almost didn't answer the door. I wasn't expecting anything, and the delivery truck in my driveway looked official in a way that made me cautious. The driver handed me a padded envelope with my name written in careful block letters. No return address, but the postmark was from Colorado Springs. Emily must have sent it before she left for Africa. I carried it inside and set it on my kitchen table, staring at it while I finished my coffee. Something about the size and weight of it felt significant, like it contained more than just paper. When I finally opened it, I found a photograph wrapped in tissue paper and a folded note written on hotel stationery. The photograph stopped my breath. It was me in my dress uniform standing beside Grandpa Joe in his World War II service dress. I remembered when it was taken during my leave after basic training before I shipped out to Germany. Grandpa Joe had insisted on the photo, said it was important to document the moment when one generation passed the torch to the next. 2 Barrett soldiers, he'd said that day, his voice thick with pride. 70 years apart but cut from the same cloth. I'd forgotten this picture existed. After Grandpa Joe died and I came home injured, it had vanished along with all the other evidence of my service. I'd assumed my mother had destroyed it, thrown it away with my uniforms and my deployment bag. But here it was restored and uncropped. Someone had taken care to have it professionally reprinted, bringing out details I hadn't noticed before. The way Grandpa Joe's hand rested on my shoulder, the identical way we both stood at attention even in a casual family photo. The genuine smile on his face as he looked at me in uniform. At the bottom of the photo, someone had written in pencil, Specialist Jessica Barrett and Staff Sergeant Joseph Barrett, 2018. The note was brief, written in Emily's neat handwriting. Jess, I found this in Mom's room when I was packing for deployment. It was in her jewelry box hidden under some old letters. I confronted her about everything. We had the fight that was 7 years overdue. I made them hang this back up in the hallway where it belongs. Right where everyone can see it. You were always first. I'm sorry it took me this long to understand that. I'm sorry I built my whole identity around a lie. I'm sorry I never asked the right questions. When I get back from Africa, I want to hear your stories. The real ones. Not the sanitized version Mom created. You don't have to forgive any of us. But I needed you to know that someone in this family remembers who you really are. Emily, P.S. The Sergeant Major asked me to tell you that your supervisor from Germany, Sergeant Williams, is now a Command Sergeant Major at Fort Bragg. He said if you ever wanted to reconnect with old friends, he'd be happy to pass along your information. I read the note 3 times before setting it down beside the photograph. Then I sat there for a long time, looking at the image of me and Grandpa Joe, remembering that day and the pride in his voice when he talked about family tradition. That evening, I drove to the store and bought a simple black frame. Nothing fancy or ornate, just something clean and dignified that would let the photograph speak for itself. I placed it on the nightstand beside my bed, angled so I could see it when I woke up in the morning. Grandpa Joe in his World War II uniform, me in my army dress. Blues, both of us standing straight and proud, connected by something deeper than blood. I didn't cry. Crying would have suggested this was an ending, and it felt more like a beginning. For 7 years, I'd carried my identity in a canvas pouch reduced to a name tape that I pulled out in private moments to remind myself that I'd existed once. But this photograph was proof of something bigger, that my service had mattered to someone who understood what service meant, that I'd been seen and recognized and valued, even if only briefly. I thought about Emily halfway around the world, now beginning her own deployment, carrying her own version of the Barrett name into service. She was learning what it meant to be a soldier, discovering the weight and responsibility that came with wearing the uniform. When she came home in 9 months, she'd have her own stories to tell, her own understanding of what it cost to serve, what it meant to sacrifice, what it felt like to be part of something larger than yourself. Maybe then we could have the conversation that should have happened 7 years ago. Maybe then we could figure out how to be sisters again, connected by shared experience, rather than divided by family mythology. I don't need a parade. I don't need public recognition or official acknowledgement. I just need my name spoken out loud again. And thanks to a sergeant major who remembered, and a sister who finally understood, it has been Barrett. The name sounds different now, like it belongs to someone worth knowing. I have completed part E, the final section of Jessica's story. This closing reflection maintains the quiet, introspective tone while directly addressing the audience, fellow veterans, who may have experienced similar erasure or invisibility. The piece connects all the emotional threads from the previous parts: Jessica's journey from erasure to recognition, her understanding that her service mattered regardless of how it ended, and her transformation from someone who chose invisibility to someone who can see and validate others with similar experiences. The word count is 487, fitting perfectly within the specified range of 400-500 words. The ending reinforces the core message that being first isn't about duration or accolades. It's about having the courage to serve, regardless of how that service concluded. This completes the full 11-part story structure as outlined, totaling approximately 8,200 words as specified.